Security Strategy document that was published earlier this month. It talks about restoring Europe's civilization and Western identity. It talks of Europe facing the prospect of civilization erasure and facing the loss of national identities and becoming a majority non-European. I was wondering whether or not you agree with that assessment.
Obviously, look, this is the US National Security Strategy. We published the UK National Security Strategy in the summer, so we take responsibility for our approach. The US will set out their national security strategy. There are areas in their strategy where obviously we have that, and also actually more widely, not just simply about their strategy, but in the approach that they take, that we clearly have shared vision, for example, and areas where we respect their different priorities, and also, of course, areas where it wouldn't surprise you that we would take a different view. And certainly on some of the points that you make, I think you wouldn't surprise you that we'd take a different view on the strength of European democracies, the strength of our freedoms, our support for communities, and our social cohesion as well. And I think if you want to talk about the centuries of civilization that we have to be proud of, our cultural industries are stronger than they have ever been. It's a more important part of our economy than it has ever been. We have strong and diverse communities who are proud to be British, who are an incredibly important part of the kind of country that we are, and we celebrate that and will continue to do so.
In terms of the US approach to Europe, it talks about European governments' subversion of the democratic process. It says the US will promote the influence of patriotic European parties and cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory. I'm wondering whether or not you think it is acceptable for the US to meddle in the democratic process of the UK and European countries to promote political parties that have overtly Trumpian views.
Well, I think, look, we have when we work with different long-standing allies, the US is a huge long-standing ally. We have very deep cooperation on intelligence, on security. They continue to be closest ally in a whole series of national security areas, and that continues. Of course, we have differences of view around all sorts of areas, and we respect their democracy. We obviously expect all democracies to be.
We expect that they don't respect our democracy if they're willing to meddle in it.
Well, we expect all democracies to be respected and all nations to be respected. And we, of course, can have robust differences of view about particular political issues and continue to be so. And I would also just say I regard my party as a patriotic party as well, and will continue to be very clear about the strength of our country. I'm very proud of Britain and the diverse country that we are, the creative, dynamic country that we are, and also the strong ally that we are to all sorts of countries across the world.
So I guess where I'm driving with this is that given the policies and the worldview that is outlined in the US National Security Strategy document, given that on publication the Kremlin spokesperson welcomed it as largely consistent with our view of the world, how reliable a partner is the US to the UK, given how different our worldviews are? So
I think working with the US in practice on a series of different issues. So the discussions that I've had, repeated discussions I've had with the US Secretary of State, repeated discussions that we've had, obviously the Prime Minister has many close discussions with President Trump, that we've had the state visit and so on. We've had a series of areas where we have strong shared interest in the economic and tech development, for example. That was part of the tech partnership. We discussed, in fact, while I was in Washington, the continued strong support from the US for NATO, for example, but at the same time, recognising, and we agree with this, that European countries need to do more and contribute more to their defence. We strongly agree with that. And also the work that we are doing both around Gaza and the peace process and around Sudan and the peace process as well. Of course, There are areas where we take a different view and where we will raise those with the US and discuss those, and I have done so as well. And that includes being very clear that I see strength in the way in which Europe is responding to Ukraine, for example. We need to do that alongside our allies. This peace process with the US is hugely important. But I think that the work that European countries have been doing in order to respond to that Russia threat is immensely important.
Well, I agree with you on the need for Europe to spend more and do more on defence. I'm just wondering, when you're talking to the US about NATO, given the national security strategy, so he says that the US stands ready to help, potentially through more favourable treatment on commercial matters, technology sharing and defence procurement. That doesn't really extend to the full gambit of NATO responsibilities. So in a Trumpian presidency, how confident are you in the US fulfilling its Article 5 obligations?
Well, that's actually one of the issues that I discussed while I was in Washington, and where the US administration, Secretary of State, were very clear with me, the continued and strong support that the US continue to show for NATO, and that is what we have seen as part of the NATO discussions. It's also some of the issues that have been discussed around security guarantees as part of the Ukraine discussions. Again, immensely important. Europe does have to do more. It was part of our discussions at the NATO foreign ministers, and that's why we're increasing our defence spending. That's why other countries are also doing so as well. But I think that we've always said that NATO is at the heart of our security. It's immensely important to our security and will continue to be so.
I'll move on to Rich.
Thank you, Chair. Staying with the question of the US national security strategy, it characterises Europe as blocking peace between Ukraine and Russia. How does the British government respond to that characterisation when you engage with the United States government?
So we can discuss areas that we agree and also areas that we disagree, and that's, I think, always been the case. I've just been very clear publicly that I see Europe's response has shown considerable strength in the way in which we've had so many countries, actually not just in Europe but really across the world, being prepared to join the coalition of the willing that the Prime Minister and the French President established and co-chair. That has been really important. I think the continued investment to support Ukraine, to support Ukraine's defences and also to support Ukraine's energy infrastructure that's taking place at the moment, and our continued commitment, the fact that so many European countries are increasing defence spending now in response to the real threat that we face from Russia. And I think you have heard some of the things that the head of MI6 said yesterday. I would really just reiterate this. The threat from Russia is not simply about the threat to Ukraine. The threat from Russia to the stability and security of Europe is very real. We should be very clear-eyed about that, whether it's the nature of hybrid threats, whether it's the kinds of military intervention we've obviously seen in terms of the threat to Ukraine, whether it's other kinds of deliberate cyber disinformation threats and so on, or threats to undersea cables, the broad range of threats that are posed by Russia that we need to take immensely seriously. And I think Europe is strongly pulling together in response to those threats.
Foreign Secretary will be glad to hear that in the new year we will give you a new report on disinformation that we're in the process of putting together. And before I move back to Ukraine, I think you had a question on United States, and then I'll move back to you on Ukraine, if that's all right.
Just very briefly, on following on from the other questions about US policy, there seems to be a pattern of attack by the US government on British Muslims, in particular on the Mayor of London. I'm a very, very proud London MP, proud of our diversity, as you mentioned. What would you say and comment about those attacks on our Mayor and the false information given about our fantastic capital city?
Yeah, I think Sadiq Khan is doing a brilliant job as London Mayor. You see he's delivering for Londoners, and we see the strong support of, in many surveys, London being rated as the best capital city to live in anywhere in the world. So I think we see the rich economy, the strength of our communities across London, and I strongly support the work the Mayor is doing.
Well, we've got 3 London MPs on the panel here, and we
Yeah.
agree with that. Richard.
Foreign Secretary, you spoke a moment ago about security guarantees for Ukraine. We've heard overnight some quite positive words said about US security guarantees, described variously as Article 5-like, very strong guarantees, platinum standard. Chancellor Merz said US security guarantees are remarkable. Please, could you describe how these security guarantees might operate and what the UK contribution might be to them?
So I'm going to just, I think, recognise that some of these discussions are still ongoing. We believe that significant progress has been made on security guarantees, but because those discussions are not yet concluded, I don't want to preempt the conclusion of those discussions. The whole point about having the security guarantees is obviously to ensure that Putin cannot just pause and come again, that it doesn't just become a pause for him simply to rearm, to strengthen his military resources and then launch further attacks, whether it be on Ukraine or on anybody else. And that's why the security guarantees are so important. There has to be some deterrence in this process against Russian aggression. So those are the issues that we are looking at. That's why we've all talked about a just and lasting peace. But I think, unfortunately, apologies to you and to the committee, it would be premature for me to talk about the detail of that at this stage.
It would go further than the mere reassurance force that has been discussed up to now.
I think, look, we have to all be able to have that confidence. Ukraine has to have the confidence that that any agreement doesn't simply mean that Putin then goes further again 12 months later or 6 months later. But those are also about guarantees for other countries concerned about security and stability across Europe as well. The only other thing I would then just reiterate, and the point that I made at the beginning, is that ultimately, we have huge amount of work underway between Ukraine and the US and supported by European countries. Frankly, I do not yet see commitment from Russia to sign up to peace, and they could do so at any point. They could sign up to a peace process, and actually that is where we need the pressure. That's one of the reasons why we're continuing with the pressure around sanctions on Russia, the economic pressure, and also pursuing the issues around Russian sovereign assets as well.
What's about SAFE?
I wasn't planning to. Right, okay. I'm curious then to know about the UK-EU cooperation around arms, and specifically the shortcomings around SAFE that we've seen in recent weeks. Might we see any further re-engagement between the UK and the European Commission on SAFE talks in the new year?
Look, the timescale and the cost made this not value for money. We were always very clear we needed a value for money, but as you know, we continue with strong defence partnerships anyway. There's a whole series of different ways, including third country terms that we can be part of, all of those programmes, and we continue to have direct defence agreements and partnerships with a number of different countries. We've seen the new agreements, obviously, with Norway and other countries as well. But we're not currently proposing to reopen the discussions around SAFE.
Isn't it disgraceful that the Canadians can get access to SAFE on the basis of paying in £10 million and euros, and we have to pay $6 billion? I mean, what is going on? You know, we play a leading role in the defence of Europe, and why are we not allowed into SAFE?
Well, as I think we have made clear, we're only prepared to be part of arrangements that work as value for money. And I think that has to be a guiding principle for us. But we have a lot of different defence partnerships, whether it be around frigates, whether it be around GCAP, whether it be around different forms of